12,000 men, one desert stronghold, one final echoing closure. The gates of Kidal have finally been sealed. As the dust of late April and early May 2026 settles over the Sahel, the world is witnessing a paradox that was once deemed impossible. For decades, this city was not merely a collection of buildings in the sand, it was a fortress of defiance, a jagged splinter in the side of Malian unity, often shielded by the long, cold shadows of foreign interests. But today, the silence in the streets of Kidal is heavy with the weight of a new reality. Those who once paraded through these corridors of dust with the arrogance of the untouchable are now reported to be begging for an exit. The hunters have become the hunted, and the walls they thought would protect their rebellion have transformed into the cold bars of a steel trap. This is the Kidal siege victory that many said would never come, executed with the clinical precision of a continent finally finding its own pulse. Ibrahim Traoré, the young captain whose name has become a rhythmic pulse for a new generation, recently sent a message that vibrated far beyond the borders of Burkina Faso and Mali. He declared that this movement is not a struggle for a mere piece of geography. It is a battle for the very soul of a continent that has been silenced, partitioned, and patronized for far too long. He spoke of the sun rising over the red earth of Kidal today, noting that it is not the same sun that set on the humiliation of our ancestors. It is a light that reveals a hidden strength, a flame that refuses to be extinguished by the winds of external interference. Stay with us. This is more than a headline. It is a hinge in history. If this story resonates with your sense of justice, do not look away. What comes next may change how we read the map of our world. If you believe in these narratives of dignity, show your support with a like, a comment, or a subscription to this channel, the Sahel Doctrine. It means more than numbers. It keeps the flame of truth burning in a world of shadows. For the African diaspora watching from the bustling streets of Washington, D.C., the quiet suburbs of London, or the heartbeat of Paris, this moment represents the restoration of a dignity that was stolen generations ago. It is a bridge across the Atlantic, connecting the struggle for civil rights with the struggle for continental sovereignty. This is Black history being written in real time, not in the ink of a textbook, but in the sweat of the soldier and the resolve of the leader. To understand the gravity of this moment, one must understand that Kidal was never just a local issue. It was the chessboard where global powers moved their pieces in silence, ensuring that the Sahel remained a region of managed chaos. By encircling this city, the AES Alliance has done more than win a tactical battle. They have torn up the old rulebook of proxy warfare. This is the essence of the Sahel sovereignty strategy. It is the realization that a nation is only as strong as its ability to secure its own borders without asking for a foreign permit. Ibrahim Traoré and his counterparts in Niger and Mali are not just moving troops, they are moving a mountain of historical expectation. They are proving that the drum of African independence, which many thought had faded into a faint whisper, is now a roar that can be heard across the oceans. But as the grip of the alliance tightens around Kidal, a frantic energy has begun to pulse through the halls of distant capitals. The architects of this war, those who have sat comfortably in air-conditioned briefing rooms thousands of miles away, are suddenly scrambling. They are not worried about the men in the desert. They are worried about what those men will find when the final doors are kicked open. They are worried about the receipts, the radio logs, and the cold, hard proof of a betrayal that spans decades. Why is there a sudden, desperate call for humanitarian corridors? Why is the international community suddenly concerned with dialogue only when the state is on the verge of total victory? To find the truth, we must look into the shadows of the night that changed everything. The night when the lion of the Sahel stopped dreaming and started hunting. It was a night of fire, a night of blood, and a night that revealed that the greatest danger was not standing across the battlefield, but was sitting right next to the seat of power. As we peel back the layers of the Kidal encirclement, we must ask, what secrets are currently being buried in the sands to prevent the world from seeing the true face of this war? And who among the elites is already packing their bags, terrified of the dawn that is about to break over the Sahel? To understand why the air in Kidal is thick with the scent of a closing era, we must first look back at a night that shattered the silence of the Sahel and changed the geometry of African resistance forever. It was the night the lion of the Sahel stopped sleeping and realized that the greatest danger was not the enemy standing across the dunes, but the one sitting right next to him in the briefing room. On the evening of the 25th of April, 2026, a man named Alassane Dio drove a vehicle through the quiet, dust-veiled streets of Katy, heading toward the residence of the defense minister. This was no stranger, no ghost from the desert. Reports suggest he knew the security rotations, the precise timing of the guard shifts, and most tragically, he likely knew the man he was about to betray on a personal level. The explosion that followed did more than claim the lives of Minister Sadio, his wife, and his young grandson. It tore a hole in the very foundation of trust within the Malian state. When the smoke finally cleared and the soldiers recovered Dio's mobile phone from the wreckage, what they found sent shock waves from Bamako to Ouagadougou. This was not the work of a lone wolf or a desperate fanatic. The digital trail revealed a spiderweb of communications involving high-ranking military personnel and established politicians. Imagine for a moment the hard reality facing Ibrahim Traoré and his allies. They were fighting a brutal war on the front lines, while the people sworn to guard their backs were selling their coordinates for a handful of foreign silver. This was the moment the Sahel sovereignty strategy shifted from a dream of development to a cold, calculated necessity for survival. The leadership realized that you cannot build a house of freedom if the architects are secretly selling the bricks to the arsonists. Let me introduce you to Musa. Musa is a 60-year-old retired sergeant living in a modest house on the outskirts of Bamako. He spent 30 years in the uniform, losing his left eye in a skirmish decades ago, a scar he wears like a medal of honor. When Musa heard about the betrayal in Katy, he sat on his porch for hours in a heavy, suffocating silence. For men like Musa, the uniform is not just fabric. It is a sacred vow, a shroud for those who die so others may live. He told his neighbors that in his day, a soldier's word was his life. But now, some have replaced their ancestral pride with the cold weight of foreign currency. Musa represents a generation of Africans who have watched their leaders be sold out time and time again by internal traders working for external masters. His pain is the pain of a whole continent, tired of being stabbed in the back by its own children. This is where we must confront the raw psychology of the Sahelian struggle. For years, foreign analysts and mainstream media outlets have called this a terrorism problem, but Ibrahim Traoré sees the truth for what it is, a colonial war by proxy. Consider the facts. You do not get 12,000 coordinated fighters attacking 5 cities simultaneously without precise high-level intelligence. You do not bypass the elite security at a minister's home unless someone holds the door open from the inside. This realization changed the rules of engagement. The AES Alliance understood that they were facing a fifth column, a group within their own borders working tirelessly for their enemies. This betrayal was designed to paralyze the state, to force the young leaders into a shell of paranoia, and cause the military to dismantle itself from within. But the plan backfired. Instead of fear, the betrayal sparked a calculated fury. The investigation in Bamako moved with a speed that the silent architects of this chaos did not expect. It wasn't just about arresting soldiers, it was about tracing the blood-stained money. Because a betrayal of this magnitude is never free. Someone, somewhere, signed the check that paid for Alassane Dio's silence and his suicide mission. As the arrests climbed and the politicians were brought into the searing light of justice, the strategic map began to change. The leadership looked at the city of Kidal and saw it for what it truly was, the strategic heart of this entire network. If Kidal remained an open city, it would continue to be the safe haven where these betrayals were planned and where the foreign money was distributed like a plague. The order was given. No more half measures. The encirclement of Kidal was not just a military move, it was an act of national purification. Ibrahim Traoré and the leaders of Niger and Burkina Faso knew that if they did not seal the borders and the cities now, the cancer of treachery would spread until there was nothing left to save. This is about whether or not a people have the right to exist without being sold out by their own elite. When Musa heard that the AES forces were marching toward the north, he went back inside his house and put on his old military cap. He didn't have a weapon, but he had a renewed hope. He knew that for the first time in his 60 years, the people in charge were finally hunting the traitors instead of protecting them. He felt that the Kidal siege victory was already being won in the hearts of the people before the first shot was even fired. But as the troops marched into the desert, a chilling question emerged. If 12,000 men were paid to bring a nation to its knees, how deep do the pockets of the enemy really go? We are talking about billions of francs, thousands of guns, and a supply chain that crosses oceans. if the soldiers in the Sahel are the ones dying? Who are the ones profiting in the air-conditioned boardrooms of the world's financial capitals? We are about to look at the numbers that the mainstream media refuses to show you, the cold, hard accounting of a war that is being bought and sold while the innocent pay the price. 20 billion CFA. That is the cold, calculated price of one night of terror. To those watching from the United States, that is roughly $33 million spent in a single weekend in one of the most impoverished regions on Earth. To understand the Sahel sovereignty strategy, we must stop talking about ideology for a moment and start talking about accounting. War in the Sahel is not just a clash of beliefs, it is a high-stakes, multinational business operation. When 12,000 fighters launched their coordinated assault across 5 cities, a strategist did not just see a tragedy, they saw a balance sheet. These 12,000 men are not ghosts, they are humans who must eat, they need boots, they need fuel, and most importantly, they need to be paid. At a conservative estimate, the personnel costs alone for such a strike exceed 4 billion CFA. When you add the modified desert vehicles, the Western-made optics, and the sophisticated communication gear, the total investment is staggering. And we must ask the question that the mainstream media refuses to whisper. How does a group of supposedly independent rebels raise $33 million for a single weekend? The answer is that they do not. Someone else is signing the checks. This is the hallmark of modern proxy warfare, where the shadow economy is used to maintain a state of permanent instability. Chaos is a discount for those who want to buy what Africa has for pennies on the dollar. Before we reveal the next chapter, which is perhaps the most powerful assertion of sovereignty you will ever hear, I want to pause and speak directly to you. If this channel has moved you, if these stories are touching something deep in your spirit, then consider becoming a member. Not for exclusive content or perks, but because supporting this channel is directly supporting narratives that mainstream media refuses to tell. Every membership is a vote for the Sahel Doctrine's mission. Every member becomes a co-creator of the revolution we are documenting. Join us. Stand with the principle that African wealth belongs to Africa. To truly grasp the fuel behind this machine, we have to look past the smoke and deep into the red earth. We are talking about gold. Mali is a titan of gold production, yet the communities sitting atop these riches live in heartbreaking poverty. This is the great paradox of our time. Let me tell you about Ousmane. Ousmane is 58 years old, a man whose face is a map of the harsh Sahelian sun and decades of backbreaking labor. He descends into narrow, dangerous shafts every day, digging with his bare hands. 10 years ago, Ousmane had 3 sons. Today, he is alone. His oldest son was killed when an armed group raided their village to seize the mine. His other 2 sons, faced with the hollow ache of starvation, were coerced into joining the very insurgency that ruined their family. For Ousmane, gold is not a blessing. It is a curse that attracts predators from across the horizon. When he looks at a grain of gold in his palm, he does not see wealth. He sees the blood of his children and the stolen future of his people. Ousmane represents the silent majority of the Sahel, the primary victims of a resource war they never requested. For men like him, Ibrahim Traoré is not just a political figure. He is the first leader in a generation to look at the mines and declare that this belongs to the people, not to the shadows. This is the heart of African resource sovereignty. The blood gold pipeline starts in a hole in the ground in northern Mali, where raw gold is extracted under the watchful eyes of armed groups. These groups tax every miner, funneling the wealth into the global financial system through regional hubs, eventually reaching international refineries where its origin is erased. This clean gold ends up in wedding rings in Virginia or smartphones in New York. The global economy is built on a lack of transparency that allows Africa to fund its own destruction. Ibrahim Traoré and the AES Alliance have realized that as long as this pipeline remains open, the war will never end. This is the strategic imperative behind the Kidal siege victory. Kidal is the gateway, the geographic hub through which this illicit trade flows. By sealing the city, the AES is effectively putting a lock on the bank account of the insurgency. They are nationalizing the resource, ensuring that every ounce of gold that leaves the soil is used to build schools and hospitals rather than buying more Kalashnikovs. This is the first step in dismantling a centuries-old system of extraction. However, when you threaten a multi-billion-dollar illicit industry, you do not just make enemies in the desert, you make enemies in the boardrooms of global financial capitals. The people who profit from untraceable gold do not want a strong, sovereign AES that can audit its own mines. This is why we see a wave of sanctions and negative pressure. These nations are being punished not for their failures, but for their audacity to succeed on their own terms. As the encirclement of Kidal completes, the rebels are finding that their gold cannot buy them a way out. Their foreign backers are discovering that their money cannot buy loyalty in a population that has finally found its pride. But as one trap closes, another is set. Faced with total defeat, the rebels have made a desperate, fatal alliance, one that will change the moral landscape of this war and force the world to choose a side. They have joined forces with a darkness that the world knows all too well, and in doing so, they may have just signed their own death warrants. Moral legitimacy is a currency that cannot be printed in any foreign bank, nor can it be mined from the deepest shafts of the Sahel. It is earned through the consistency of one's character and the purity of one's cause. For many years, the groups seeking independence in northern Mali, specifically the movements under the banner of Azawad, actually enjoyed a surprising amount of sympathy from the international community. They were often portrayed in Western journals as secular political actors with genuine, long-standing grievances against a distant capital that had ignored their needs for generations. They were viewed not as criminals, but as marginalized people fighting for a seat at the table of history. This perception was their greatest shield, ensuring that whenever the state attempted to reclaim its territory, the world would cry out for dialogue rather than total defeat. But something shifted in the searing heat of the 2024 and 25 campaigns. As the pressure from the AES Alliance began to mount, the rebel movements made a desperate, fatal choice that has completely rewritten the moral map of this war. They formed what many are now calling an unholy alliance. In the lead-up to the massive attacks in April, these secular rebel groups were seen operating side by side with JNYM, the most notorious al-Qaeda affiliate in the region. This wasn't a whispered rumor or a hidden coordination in the dead of night. The leaders of the rebellion openly acknowledged this partnership, trading their political legitimacy for the short-term military muscle of extremists. Let me tell you about Dr. Karim. Karim is a 65-year-old retired professor of political science who has lived in Washington, D.C. for the last 30 years. He was born in the north of Mali and spent his entire career in the West, arguing that the cause of his people back home was a legitimate quest for self-determination. But when he saw the images of rebel fighters sharing ammunition and planning suicide strikes with operatives who carry the black flag of extremism, Karim told his colleagues that the cause had lost its soul. He represents the thousands of educated Africans in the diaspora who realize that you cannot claim to be fighting for freedom while shaking hands with an ideology that seeks to enslave your culture and erase your identity. Pause for a moment and share with us where you are watching this video. Is it from the vast landscapes of Africa, from the historical cities of Europe, from the heart of the Americas, or from a small village whose name deserves to be spoken aloud? Tell us in the comments. Because every place matters. The Sahel Doctrine wants to thank you personally for being part of this journey, and we send a wish across the distance to each of you. May freedom and dignity walk beside you, and may your hands always find the strength to build what is right, wherever you are. Let our comments be not just words, but bridges of solidarity that span the globe. By joining forces with terrorists, the rebels handed Ibrahim Traoré the ultimate moral high ground. This was a strategic masterstroke by the young captain. He didn't just see a military threat, he saw an opportunity to unify the continent and the world against a common, undeniable evil. He began to frame the liberation of Kidal not just as a territorial dispute, but as a crusade for the very survival of African civilization against foreign-funded extremism. This framing made it impossible for any foreign power to openly support the forces inside Kidal without looking as though they were supporting global terror. This is why the silent architects of this war are now scrambling. They spent decades building a narrative of a legitimate rebellion, and in one desperate weekend of violence, that narrative was burned to the ground by the rebels themselves. The Sahel sovereignty strategy has now simplified the map. It is no longer a complex web of ethnic grievances. It has become a clear battle between a national vision and a coalition of chaos. Ibrahim Traoré argues that you cannot be a patriot of your region if you are willing to let it become an emirate ruled by the sword of foreign ideologies. This message has resonated deeply with the older generation in the Sahel, people who remember a time when their faith was one of peace and community. They see this radical ideology as a foreign transplant, a colonial tool designed to erase the African heart. As we look at the situation in Kidal today, we see the results of this moral collapse. The trap is closing, and as supplies run low, the internal friction between the secular rebels and the religious extremists is beginning to show. There are reports of heated arguments over tactics, leadership, and the distribution of what little food remains. This is the heavy price of a deal with the devil. You might get the gold and the guns for a moment, but you lose the one thing you can never buy back: the trust of your own people. The Kidal siege victory is being won because the people have decided that a unified state, however imperfect, is better than a fractured land ruled by shadows. But as the pressure reaches a breaking point, the desperation of those inside the walls is driving them toward a final, reckless gamble. They are no longer begging the state for mercy. They are attempting to lure the international community into a trap of their own making. They are preparing a spectacle that is designed to force the world to intervene before the AES Alliance can finish the job. The question is, will the world see the truth of the unholy alliance, or will they fall for the final lie of a dying rebellion? The shadows in Kidal are lengthening, and the most dangerous hour is just before dawn. Now we must zoom out from the dusty, blood-stained streets of Kidal and look at the global map, for what is unfolding in this corner of the Sahel is sending ripples through the corridors of power from Washington, D.C. to Paris and from Moscow to Beijing. We are witnessing the first real-world test of the AES architecture, a military and political alliance that many foreign analysts predicted would collapse within months. Instead, Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso have coordinated a strategic encirclement that is textbook in its execution. To the south, Malian ground forces are pushing with a renewed sense of purpose. To the east and west, airstrikes from the joint AES command are neutralizing rebel positions with surgical precision. And to the north, the Algerian border, once a porous escape route for those seeking to evade justice, has been effectively cut off. This is the physical manifestation of African strategic autonomy. For the first time in modern history, a group of West African nations has planned and executed a major theater operation without the guidance, the funding, or the permission of a foreign superpower. This is the nightmare scenario for those who have long viewed Africa as a mere playground for proxy wars. If these nations can take and hold Kidal on their own, the entire argument for foreign military intervention in the Sahel collapses. Let me introduce you to Amara. Amara is a 45-year-old strategic analyst of Malian descent living in London. He has spent 20 years studying the geopolitical shifts of the global south. He told me that for the last 2 weeks, his phone has not stopped ringing with calls from colleagues in Europe who are in a state of absolute shock. They cannot understand how these 3 countries, supposedly crippled by sanctions and diplomatic isolation, have managed to trap a rebel force of 12,000 men. Amara sees this as the birth of a multipolar world where Africa is no longer a spectator, but a player. He believes that the fall of Kidal will be remembered as the moment the Berlin Conference of 1884 was finally undone by the hands of Africans themselves. We must understand the educational concept of the buffer zone. For years, foreign powers used Kidal as a buffer to keep the Malian state weak and to justify their own military presence. By maintaining a state of controlled instability, they ensured that no single African leader became too powerful. Ibrahim Traoré recognized this game and decided to end it. By closing the trap on Kidal, he is removing the buffer and forcing the world to deal with a unified, sovereign state. This is why the sudden calls for humanitarian corridors are so telling. When the rebels were victorious, the world was silent. Now that the state is reclaiming its territory, there is a sudden rush of concern. The reactions from global powers tell a fascinating story. In Washington, there is a quiet realization that the old tools of influence, sanctions and aid withdrawal, are no longer working. In Paris, there is deep embarrassment as the very territory they claimed was unable to be stabilized is being cleaned up by local forces they once looked down upon. Ibrahim Traoré is not looking to trade one master for another. His goal is a genuine African sovereignty that can negotiate with any partner from a position of strength, not desperation. But as the circle closes, we must consider the price of failure. The leaders of Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso know they are not just fighting for a city. They are fighting for the validity of their entire political vision. The rebels inside Kidal are now reported to be asking for a way out. This is the ultimate irony. 1 week ago, they were part of an army that attacked the capital and killed civilians. Now, facing the cold steel of the alliance, they appeal to the very international laws they chose to ignore. Ibrahim Traoré faces a difficult choice. But if we look at his track record, He is a man who values long-term stability over short-term diplomatic approval. Before we close, let us pause. What you have just heard is not simply an episode of history. It is a reminder that sovereignty, dignity, and hope are still alive, waiting to be claimed. If this message has moved you, then subscribe to this channel, the Sahel Doctrine. Not because we ask for numbers, but because we are building a space where voices of independence are honored, and where stories of pride continue to be told. By subscribing, you are not just supporting us, you are choosing to walk with us into the next chapter of Africa's unfolding story. Every voice that joins this community makes the chorus for justice louder and harder to ignore. Subscribe now, and stand ready for the chapter that comes after this one. As the Lion of the Sahel continues its march toward a brighter dawn, the dust over Kidal is finally settling, but the echoes of this victory will be felt for generations. We have seen how a city once thought to be an impregnable fortress for rebellion was brought to its knees by the sheer willpower of a unified Africa. This is not just a military map being redrawn, it is the soul of a continent being reclaimed. Throughout this journey, we have uncovered the cold reality of internal betrayal and the billions of francs that flow from the soil into the global economy to fund the weapons of destruction. We have seen that sovereignty is not just about a flag, it is about control over one's resources. For our brothers and sisters in the diaspora, and for every elder like Musa who has watched the cycles of conflict with a heavy heart, this moment offers a genuine glimmer of hope. Ibrahim Traoré and the AES are proving that when the chains of foreign dependence are broken, the lion can finally stand tall. They are challenging a system that treated the Sahel as a laboratory for chaos. As we witness the silent architects of this war scrambling for an exit, we must remember that the work of building a nation is far from over. A city can be retaken in a month, but a lasting peace is built over a lifetime. The real challenge is to turn this military success into a future where the gold of the land builds the hospitals of its people. The Kidal siege victory is a message to the world. The rules of the game have changed forever. Today, the Kidal siege victory stands as a testament to what is possible when the Red Earth is defended by those who truly love it. This entire movement is the definitive proof of a successful Sahel sovereignty strategy, a blueprint for a free and dignified Africa. Thank you for your heart, your time, and your commitment to the truth. May peace and justice find their way to every corner of the continent.